Good morning, and thanks for joining us here for live Impact News on 13 News Now Plus. I'm Eugene Daniel, and boy, do we have a lot to cover today. A big day of news, just hours after voters made history in the Commonwealth, and a major political surge by Democrats across the country. Also, the government shutdown now becomes the longest in American history at 36 days. And moments ago, the U.S. Supreme Court began hearing arguments on whether President Trump's tariffs are legal. This is a look inside of our streaming studio here at 13 News Now in Hampton Roads, Virginia. Across from me is producer Sarah Calloway. Hey, Sarah. And then joining us today to talk about the history that was made in Virginia and across the country last night on election night, we have Dr. Leslie Caughell, Virginia Wesleyan professor, and we will just start straight with that. Virginia will have its first woman to be governor as the governor of Virginia. Abigail Spanberger, the Democrat, won that race over Lieutenant Governor Republican Winsome Earle-Sears, and by a pretty sizable margin there. Leslie, what did you make of it?
Yeah, I mean, this is really a historic election when we think about representation. Not only did Virginia get its first woman governor, but we have the first Muslim American elected to statewide office in Virginia. I mean, this was a good night for Democrats, and they had a lot of cushion with that victory. So I think we see the campaigns did incredibly well in Virginia.
And, you mentioned the history just across the ticket there. And one thing, though, I wanted to look at was just the surge by Democrats, not just along the statewide ticket, but also in the House of Delegates. Republicans had hoped that they'd be able to regain the House of Delegates that they lost control of just, 2 years ago. And not only did they not do that, Democrats widened their majority. Looks to be about gaining like 13 seats in the House of Delegates at this point. What does that mean for Virginia policy moving forward?
Did they ever? I remember President Obama talking about a midterm election where Democrats lost and calling it a shellacking. And all I could think of last night when we were looking at the House of Delegate maps was this is a shellacking. I think you're really going to see that the margin of victory in the House of Delegates gives Governor Spanberger a lot of leeway to enact more liberal policies. And again, she's a fairly moderate candidate, so we're not talking about like Mamdani in New York City. But certainly when you talk about what Virginia politics is going to look like in the next couple of years, you have a clear Democratic majority that's going to make Democratic policies a lot easier and more straightforward to enact.
And what do you think some of those policies are going to be off the bat? I know we'll focus in just a few moments on redistricting, right? We'll talk about what this now means for that. But the other policies now that Democrats can just push forward with because of the sizable majority that they have.
Yeah, so I imagine you're going to see a lot of things related to the social safety net. Democrats have really been focused on doing things like shoring up health care coverage and things for Virginians, and I think you'll see some movement there. I think it's noteworthy that in the past couple of legislative assemblies, you've seen some pushes for gun restrictions that have been vetoed by Governor Youngkin, and I think, again, you're going to see less resistance on those. I would imagine, too, when we talk about women's reproductive health, you're going to see some protections kind of around those enacted in Virginia, just to kind of ensure that should Republicans take control of the House of Delegates in the future or kind of get the governorship, that you won't see the rolling back of those sorts of policies as well. So I would imagine, aside from redistricting, you're going to see some movement in all of those areas.
But let's talk about redistricting, right? So Democrats in Virginia, they have now joined the ranks of other states like California, which had a big win last night too, with Proposition 50 putting forward their new maps to try to get Democrats 5 more favorable seats in the U.S. House of Representatives. Now Virginia joining in that fight, just pushing forward a constitutional amendment. They have more steps that they have to go through in order to get new maps drawn here for Democrats to have more favorable seats. What does last night's results maybe tell you about their ability to do that, and also the voting public's thoughts about what they're trying to do?
I mean, so one kind of, I think, wrinkle in all of this is it's tough to know how much voters are voting about any particular issue, particularly something like redistricting that came up the very end. It's kind of wonky. I doubt most Americans, or most Virginians, I'm sorry, were kind of sitting in line on election day thinking this is just about redistricting for me, right? Maybe somebody did that, but not most Virginians. I would say, though, I think absent court interference, it looks like the House of Delegates is going to be able to put this amendment on the ballot for Virginians to look at before the midterm elections. And I have to say, as I was watching the returns yesterday, all I kept thinking was, if I were Jen Kagans, I would not be feeling great about this, because even absent that redistricting, which would likely pull voters from safer Democratic districts into hers and make it a little less competitive, you can't be feeling good about Republicans' chances in the midterm elections. So, I mean, it looks like redistricting is going to happen in Virginia for better or worse, but even absent that redistricting, it does not look like it's going to be a good time to be running as a Republican incumbent for re-election.
And you have to think, after last night and how Democrats are probably feeling across the country, with big wins in New York, big wins in New Jersey. We talked about California, and obviously here in Virginia, we see the efforts just within the last 24 to 36 hours now in Maryland, too, pushing back. And, of course, all of this starting when the president gave kind of that all call to states to try to change their maps so that Republicans can gain seats in the U.S. House of Representatives. So this definitely plays into that national battle that we're seeing happening at the state level. But I want to pull something else up for you, Dr. Caughell, if you could take a look here. This is a graphic put together by the Virginia Public Access Project. It shows the change in the party performance across the state. You can see there with the arrows, Democrats made gains in each locality, including an 18-point swing in Virginia Beach and in Chesapeake, and 10-point swing in James City County, all areas where Republicans won in 2021 with the last gubernatorial election and then flipped blue last night. What do you think happened there? How can you make sense of this?
I think there are a couple different ways of making sense of this. The first thing I would say is, if there is any takeaway from the Virginia elections last night, it's that candidate quality matters. Right? Abigail Spanberger was a good candidate for Virginia. She kind of fit the temperament of Virginia, and she ran a textbook campaign. It was very disciplined. It was very structured. She was on message, even when there were kind of wrenches thrown in by kind of just October surprises and things like that happening around her. Sears did not. She was not as good a candidate in many ways. She doesn't reflect, I think, the temperament of your average Virginia voter quite as much. But setting that aside, I think you can't underestimate how much the fact that Virginia is so closely tied to the federal government in terms of its economics and livelihood mattered here. And one of the really telling pieces of information for me was Prince William County in Northern Virginia voted for Kamala Harris by 18 percentage points. Yesterday, it voted for Abigail Spanberger by 34. Right? That is a massive swing. And I think part of that is a reflection on Trump-era politics generally, and also things like the government shutdown, the DOGE cuts. 300,000, actually more than 300,000 Virginians work for the federal government, and that's not including the people who work for people who contract with the federal government. I was looking at some economic data that was estimating about a third of our economy is tied to federal government spending. So those sorts of kind of federal government cuts, the interventions, the uncertainty, that meant something to Virginia voters. And I think you saw them come out yesterday and say, we don't like this.
And it was interesting because we had you on before, we've had other political analysts on before, and we were looking at polling data on what Virginians saw as the top issues. And time again, the economy was at the top. A lot of people also had concerns amongst the top three about how the government was being run at the time, right? And so it was very intriguing to me to see the different candidates and what messages they were really hitting on, because at times you can kind of sense, like particularly within the Winsome Earle-Sears campaign, they were pushing with commercials, really trying to attack Abigail Spanberger on her policies when it comes to transgender in bathrooms. We saw that a lot, but it didn't quite match up with what we saw as the top priorities across the state when it came to polling data. Now, another thing that I thought was interesting yesterday, and this was based upon the difference of how we saw Abigail Spanberger pulling away from Winsome Earle-Sears. We saw in the lieutenant governor race, Ghazala Hazmi, who also, as you said, made history, pulling away from John Reed a little bit. It was not the same with Jay Jones. And we know about the controversy and his remarks, the text messages that were widely talked about, and many people saying that it was absolutely inappropriate, as they were. What sense did you make of that? Were you surprised to see the gap? What message did voters send, even in electing Jay Jones to be the next Attorney General?
I wasn't surprised by that gap. And I really think this reinforces for me this idea that candidate quality matters. Spanberger pulled him over the line in terms of an electoral victory. But, his comments in that scandal resonated with voters. And I think sometimes it's really easy for us to be like, it's all partisan politics, nothing matters anymore, nothing reaches people. But one of the things I find particularly telling when we talk about this scandal is that in Virginia especially, one of the things that Democrats have benefited from is since 2016, they have picked off traditionally Republican voters, particularly white moderate women in suburban areas. And many of those women, when they switched kind of their voting patterns, even if they didn't switch affiliation, would talk about the rhetoric. They didn't like this sort of thing, right? They didn't like the visuals of children in cages, whatever kind of the representation of this new, maybe coarser politics didn't resonate. And Jay Jones tapped into that with these comments. And I think you saw a lot of people, and a lot of people in my particular age and demographic group think, I want to vote for the Democrat. Can I vote for Jay Jones? Did this cross the line? And the fact that Spanberger wins by 15 percentage points and he looks like he's going to win by 7, I think really shows you for how many voters this scandal not just reached them, but was a deterrent. It either caused them to vote for Miyares, or if you look at the ballot numbers, it caused them just not to vote in the AG race at all. So again, candidate quality and history matters.
I want to bring something up for you. If we can, Sarah, pull up, the scan PC one more time here. This was something I found really interesting yesterday morning. This was on Jason Miyares, the current Attorney General, the Republican candidate, who really, as we just talked about here in this race between Jay Jones and him, had the biggest push amongst the Republican candidates. Not just from voting, but also when we saw the President of the United States publicly endorsed him by name repeatedly, even on Monday, saying so in a tele-rally that took place for Virginia. We didn't see that for the other candidates on the Republican ticket. So you saw a lot of support for Jason in this election. It was very interesting, this post. He talks to a guy outside of a polling location. Maybe, you know what, let's just go ahead and play it. I just realized we can just play this, right? So let me see if we can do that. Sarah, will the audio play if I press it? Mm-hmm. Okay, let's do that. And then we're going to talk about this, Leslie.
Hey, I'm here in beautiful Stafford, and I got a chance to meet with voters. I got to meet Dave, who's here, who's splitting his ticket. He's voting for me and
absolutely.
But appreciate your support.
I voted already, early voting. I voted for Spanberger for governor. I voted for you.
Appreciate it.
For Attorney General. This is not a time, nor have many times in my life, been where I have voted straight down a ticket. So here I am. I think you'll continue to be a good representative for us in the state, and we appreciate you.
God bless you. Thanks,
Yeah,
Dave.
you're welcome.
Hey, I'm here in beautiful Stafford, and I got a chance to meet with voters. I got to meet Dave.
Okay, you hear him talk to a voter who says that he has split his ticket. He voted for Abigail Spanberger for governor and then voted for Jason Miyares for Attorney General. And the text that Miyares puts on X is, if we could put that up one more time here, Sarah, Dave splitting his ticket, you can too. That was at 10 o'clock in the morning on Election Day. I don't think I've seen that before when you're talking about a Republican attorney general candidate basically encouraging people, saying, hey, if you're going to vote for the Democratic governor candidate, you can still vote for me too.
Yeah, I have to say, if I were Winsome Sears waking up this morning, I would have some sour grapes, because I really do think in a lot of ways in the last 4 weeks of this campaign, the Republican Party didn't give her much support generally, but really in the last month or so, they kind of cut her off. All of the money and the spending in this campaign really went to Jason Miyares. And it was very clear, I think, early on that Republicans had written off the top of the ticket race here. And that, I mean, at best, if she lost by 5 points, they would call this a victory in like an unlikely to win race, right? So I do think you saw Miyares kind of be like, we are not running as a ticket here. I'm running an individual race. And to be fair, Spanberger did this a little bit too with Jay Jones up until last weekend, this idea that we are running separate races even if we are on the same ticket. So I think Miyares understood that his play would involve some Spanberger voters. And again, to be fair, his loss was not the margin that Sears had. He ran a much more competitive campaign. He also, though, ended up with endorsements from the president. And keep in mind, not only did Sears not get an endorsement from the president, even kind of a tepid one, President Trump, one of his chief political strategists, Chris LaCivita, has been like insulting her and her campaign for the past couple of months. So she really didn't get much help here. And Miyares was really clear that, if you voted for Spanberger, he would welcome your vote too.
Yeah, I found that fascinating when it came across my feed at 10 in the morning. I said, this is not a good sign. Obviously, polls had already shown that there was a gap, but I don't think I can remember another member of a certain ticket blatantly saying, hey, there are people probably in our party that are going the other way. It's okay. Go for me. I hadn't seen that happen before. But in ways, as you said, we kind of seen that in the last few weeks, even with some of the commercials. We saw that Winsome Earle-Sears was really trying to nail and pin Abigail Spanberger with Jay Jones and saying she won't speak up when asked about it. Remember that moment that took place within the only gubernatorial debate that they have. But then you saw commercials from Jason Miyares that was saying, hey, when asked if she would endorse Jay Jones 3 times, she stayed silent, meaning, hey, she is kind of, in a way, making her mark. So we saw different kind of rhetoric there in the weeks leading up to it, and so but I didn't expect to see that at all. I do believe we have sound from Governor Youngkin this morning, and so he spoke on the day after these election results. Would love to just listen to him for a little bit, Leslie, with you, and see if there's anything from it that we find interesting and we can talk about it.
Yeah, he spoke about, I listened to a little bit of it while it was happening about an hour ago. He talked about the election results, he talked about the shutdown, and a little bit about how the shutdown may have impacted the election, and then he also touched on Jay Jones. So I will play that out now.
Begin with my congratulations for Governor-elect Spanberger. And she is stepping into what I believe is an incredibly important role, and that is to serve 8.8 million Virginians, an honor that this time 4 years ago I had the great privilege of doing myself. I'd also like to thank everyone who ran. In order to run for office in America today, you put your life on hold, and you expose yourself to great scrutiny and challenges, and it takes courage. And so I do want to thank everyone who ran for office. I also want to thank our election teams. Once again, Virginians stood up. We ran elections. We ran them accurately and transparently, and our election teams worked around the clock for 45 days of early voting plus the election day. And so thank you to the tremendous professionalism. This is a great country. The greatest thing about the United States of America is it is a constitutional republic. And as a constitutional republic, the people elect their leaders. People run for office, and the people elect their leaders. 4 years ago, I had the great privilege of being elected. It's one of the great honors that anyone can possibly be bestowed with, being elected by their citizens in order to serve them. And I know that Governor-elect Spanberger feels the exact same way today. A great honor to be elected. In Virginia, the truth is, governors serve one term. It's been that way for centuries. And therefore, every governor comes into office recognizing that they are receiving a baton from the previous governor and will be handing that baton to the next governor in 4 years. And that is exactly what is happening over the course of the next 10 or so weeks. Over the course of the next roughly 10 weeks, Governor-elect Spanberger will build her team. She will run her transition, and we will support her in that process so that she and her team can hit the ground running. Again, one of the truths of the great Commonwealth of Virginia is that this transition happens every 4 years. And therefore, we have a very clear responsibility. Responsibility one is to finish strong. We came in 4 years ago with an incredibly ambitious agenda, and we have worked diligently, tirelessly against that agenda, and we've accomplished an extraordinary amount. And I do believe that we will hand that baton to the governor-elect, and she will step into a Virginia that is stronger than it's ever been. A Virginia that is seeing record job growth, record investment, and record opportunity. A safer Virginia. A Virginia today that recognizes that excellence in education translates into students being prepared for that great opportunity that record jobs and record business growth represent. We have a Virginia that today has safeguarded God's great gifts to the Commonwealth. And I'm incredibly proud of the work that we have done in order to safeguard those great gifts to the Commonwealth. And we have worked together in order to meet extraordinary moments, transforming behavioral health, working together to create cell phone-free education, of course, stepping up over the course of the last week to provide the equivalent of SNAP benefits to Virginians in need to make sure that those who need assistance get that assistance. But this is what Virginians do, and that is the responsibility of a governor to prepare Virginia for the next governor and to hand that governor a Commonwealth that is stronger than when, in my case, he came in. And as I said, I believe we are going to present to Governor-elect Spanberger a Virginia that is stronger than it has ever been. And so with that, again, I congratulate her on her victory last night. We are committed to work with their transition team to make sure they are prepared and ready to go on day one. And most importantly, we are committed to running through the tape and making sure that Virginia is exactly what we know she is, the best place in America to live and work and raise a family. And so with that, again, I want to thank all of the candidates that ran. I particularly want to thank Winsome and John and Jason for their dedication during the campaign season. And I want to thank Winsome and Jason for their partnership during this incredible 3-year and 10-month journey with 2 more to go in order to finish strong. They have been extraordinary partners, extraordinary public servants, and their character is beyond reproach. And
Okay, those were some remarks by Governor Glenn Youngkin after the election results last night. He spoke this morning, and you got to hear from him talking about, obviously, the results, but he also got a little bit into the shutdown. And I think, Leslie, this is where we can talk about, surely what we saw happen in Virginia was not something that just happened on its own with just issues that involve the state. What's happening in Washington, D.C., this is a clear example that leaks into maybe more than any other state. Virginia is impacted what took place in Washington, D.C.
I think that's 100% true. And we used to talk about state elections being about local issues, and I don't think we really can anymore. Our elections are so nationalized that while Virginia voters might have had particular concerns unique to their districts, for example, energy costs and the like, the reality was the biggest issue and overhanging this entire campaign was the national context, the Trump presidency, and kind of activities around the Trump presidency that Virginians, didn't like, right? Or kind of hurt them economically or didn't resonate with their values.
Yeah, I keep going back to even the Attorney General race and how they played that, right? We saw Jason Miyares, who really went at Jay Jones, particularly after those text messages came out and said, we cannot have this person in this seat. But you saw Jay Jones consistently say, hey, my reason why I should be chosen over Jason Miyares is because of who he supports, and that is Donald Trump. And you saw that play out in this too. And I have to imagine it wasn't just the strength of Abigail Spanberger on this ticket to voters. It was that aspect and what we've seen in like UVA and some of the other schools. And it seems like Jones's message there may have also resonated.
Yeah, I think it's telling, right? That Jay Jones text scandal and think anything other than this is like a signal of a lack of judgment, at least in this particular series of exchanges, right? So that is definitely an issue that's going to resonate with voters. It is telling that the Jones campaign issued what was it sounded a pretty sincere apology, right? And then immediately shifted to this is what President Trump will do, right? So it was very much, I'm sorry this happened. Keep in mind that there is a worse outcome here, and that's the outcome that happens if President Trump is able to enact his policies in Virginia without somebody to act as a buffer. So, yeah, I think that's entirely fair to say Abigail Spanberger helped Jay Jones, but part of what pulled Abigail Spanberger kind of up over the margins I think many people expected was just a dislike of many of the policies coming out of Washington right now.
Yeah, it was certainly a message, I think, from a lot of voters across the country. We saw in New York, they went with the person for mayor that President Trump absolutely did not want, to the point where he endorses someone that he often went against in Andrew Cuomo, who was the opponent to Mamdani there. We saw what took place in California, where the voters approved the push to change the maps in California with Proposition 50. In New Jersey, you saw the election of a Democratic governor there, as opposed to a Republican who was very openly in support for the president. So definitely some things that we saw across the board there, I think, that had a little bit to do with how people felt right now about what's going on in their localities, but also what's in Washington. We also have the concession speech from Winsome Earle-Sears from last night, and then the victory speech from Abigail Spanberger. We'll start with Winsome on this because we just listened to Governor Youngkin. Let's hear what she said after the results came in. We'll talk about that, and then we'll get into the victory speech by Spanberger.
Thank you all for coming. I'm really not even supposed to be here. Think about it. I mean, I'm the immigrant from another country, and yet you all have given me the opportunity to do this. This is such an amazing thing for me. Really, even when I had the protesters from the other side, I looked at them in wonder. They thought they were hurting me, but they weren't, because I thought to myself, this is America. It's amazing that we can protest each other and go home and cook dinner for the kids and not wonder who's coming to get us. And we must never lose that. America is such a wonderful place. I don't think we know that. I'm watching people teach their children to hate their country. Why would you do that? Where else are you going to go? And so I thank you. I thank you for giving me this very great opportunity. And it started, of course, when you gave my father the opportunity to come to this great country with, again, you heard me, his $1.75. And that's what started the trajectory of my life, where I became, of course, a Marine, a business owner, CEO of certain organizations, and then a delegate, and now lieutenant governor, second in command. Now, I have to tell you, I am like everyone. I wanted to wait until every single ballot was counted. It's just because I have faith. And I wanted to wait. I wanted to wait because I know that God had called me for this purpose. And so remember now that God has called prophets. And sometimes the prophets were even beaten and some of them were killed. And so we understand that victory to the Lord looks a lot different than what we think of as victory. Victory starts with obedience. Obedience. Never forget that. So, before I say anything else, although I've said everything, I want to thank you because you believed in me, you who voted for me and who worked so hard to make our dream for Virginia come true. I still want to continue to thank God for this journey and his grace that brought me again to this wonderful country, this wonderful Commonwealth. And a special gratitude goes to my family, my wonderful husband of 39 years, and my wonderful children, Janelle and Katja.
Okay, we're going to hold for just a quick second because we saw that House Speaker Don Scott is currently speaking at a podium live. So we're going to go to that. We're going to listen to what he has to say.
Federal employees, they're probably pretty upset, and they should blame the Democrats.
Trump won last year with about 50% of the vote, maybe a little less, and he claimed that was a mandate. This is what a mandate looks like. We even ran ahead of the top of the ticket in a number of seats, demonstrating the strength of our campaigns. This is the largest Democratic majority we've won in more than 3 decades, 1987. Half my caucus wasn't born then. This is the first time in a half century that Democrats expanded our majority. First time we've won back-to-back majorities in 3 decades. We won 5 Trump districts, and we won all 8 seats that Kamala Harris won last year. We ran candidates in all 100 districts and competed everywhere, rural, urban, suburban, and we won everywhere. And this slate of candidates is exciting. We recruited diverse candidates who are deeply rooted in their communities. Teachers, veterans, caregivers, small business owners, accountants, doctors, social workers, people from the community. We rejected the outdated assumptions about who can win a frontline battleground district and shattered old, outdated stereotypes. And we ran minorities and women in a majority of our frontline battleground districts. But we didn't just run against something. We ran for something. We ran to build a winning coalition focused on delivering bold policy for Virginians, strengthening schools, creating jobs, expanding access to health care, lowering costs, and putting money back in people's pockets. And we made protecting fundamental rights central to our work, from reproductive freedom to marriage equality to the right to vote to protecting democracy itself. And we did not shy away from telling the truth. Virginia Republicans were too terrified to stand up to Donald Trump. We told that story over and over and over again. And voters heard us. Voters saw them running away, cowering in the face of Donald Trump's destruction of Virginia's jobs. And because of that, Virginia sent a message to the entire nation, to the entire world. House Democrats and Abigail Spanberger have shown the country a roadmap to victory. I'm so proud of this work, and I'm so grateful. I want to thank all of our partners, our volunteers, our organizers, our great candidates, our amazing staff, our entire House Democratic caucus that stuck together, stayed disciplined, stayed focused, and together we sent a message to the voters of Virginia. And the voters of Virginia, I want to thank them because they awarded us, they rewarded us, and they placed their confidence in us, and we're going to deliver for them. Together, we built what will be a historic, enduring majority, the largest Democratic majority in 3 decades. And I hate to tell y'all, we just getting started. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. And this is what happens when the Army and Navy get together. But beat Navy, Mr. Speaker.
The Army knows this place, buddy.
That's right. That's right. I'm so humbled to have served as campaigns chair for the House Democratic Caucus. 2 years ago, the Speaker and our caucus understood, regardless of who won the presidency, regardless of who our statewide nominees were, we needed to build the biggest battlefield in modern memory if we're going to preserve and grow our majority in the House. Here's how we did it. We approached this like a military campaign. We recruited candidates we knew would work hard to win their seats, and we made sure they had the training to meet the challenge. We raised a dragon's hoard of resources to win, and we deployed it in races on radio, on the air, online, and on the doors. And here's what happened. Our caucus alone raised over $30 million, nearly doubling what we did 2 years ago, and nearly tripling what was raised in 2021. We outspent Republicans by 2-to-1 on television and online, meaning that voters saw more of our message more often in the final weeks of the campaign. In fact, in the final weeks of the campaign, the Democratic advantage on TV was so great that we outpointed Republicans by 10,000 points in the final week, including in the pricey DC media market. We ran the biggest battleground campaign in modern history, the biggest field campaign in modern history, and each of our candidates knocked at least 5,000 doors, having conversations with their neighbors that helped us secure this historic majority. And the result? The last time Democrats had this big a majority, it was before Delegate Bobby Orrock, who was defeated last night, was elected in 1989. In several races, we even ran ahead of the top of the ticket. And our battlefield candidates overperformed Kamala Harris's performance dramatically in every single district. Last night, we showed that Americans will hold cowards accountable who won't stand up to Donald Trump's attacks on our livelihoods and values. This is how we won in 2025. It's how Democrats win in 2026 and beyond. Thank you.
Question time. Let's go. Let's go. Greg. Mr. Speaker, can you give us some specifics of what you hope to do with your consolidated power? What are your priorities?
I mean, we're going to listen to the voters. They already told us what the priorities should be. They said they want us to work hard to lower the cost of housing, lower the cost of health care. They want their schools to be safe. They want us to make sure that we continue to protect public safety. You know, Republicans litigated a lot of these issues, and the voters didn't believe them, didn't trust them. And the biggest thing that we did with these new members that are coming in is these were people from the community. Like I said, they were veterans, they were teachers, they were social workers. They were trusted by the community. We have a pediatrician coming in, doctor will be in the house. And so we have folks that cross the gamut and across the spectrum, and we have literally a Democratic coalition that I think that will continue to be attractive to independents and some Republicans. We couldn't have got a majority this big if Republicans didn't vote for Democrats last night. Republicans came over to our point of view last night, and they rejected the chaos and confusion, not only coming from the White House, but what's coming from the Virginia GOP, where they will not stand up to Donald Trump.
Olivia. You talked about this being a roadmap for other states next year. I'm wondering about how Virginia may have unique circumstances with the federal layoffs uniquely impacting our state, and what you have to say about that impacting this race, and if the circumstances will be the same in other states as time goes on.
I mean, I think history tells us that when Virginia does what we did tonight, it doesn't look good for 26 for Republicans. And I think, these circumstances around inflation going up. Remember, Donald Trump said on day one that he would lower the price of things. He would lower the price of goods. He'd lower inflation. Everything has gone up. Housing, childcare, groceries, beef. He has these dumb tariffs, what he calls low IQ tariffs, that he has all over the place that are hurting people. And I think that pain, we saw the canary in the coal mine before this happened. We saw it in races in Iowa and Florida, special elections. We saw it in other places already. And we knew that if we continued to communicate what we thought we would communicate, nobody thought we'd get 64 damn seats, but, I had 55 as my floor. But I think this message will travel unless the Republicans course correct. Like, it's really not good to be running the MAGA playbook when MAGA ain't on the ballot. You on your own. And what they learned last night is Trump will not come to their rescue. He watched them like they're just flailing about and didn't come through. He had a teleconference call rally where he didn't even mention Winsome Earle-Sears' name. You can't make this stuff up. You can't make it up. And so I think he abandoned them, just like he's abandoned American values by tearing down the White House and going down during the Gilded Age at Mar-a-Lago. And I think people don't like it. I think people are angry, and I think you're going to continue to see that be expressed.
Julie,
you want to jump in anytime.
You talk about this being a mandate, but some analysts are already questioning whether that's kind of overstating it, given the fact that we had a full 37% of Virginians who said in our NBC exit polls that this was really about opposing Donald Trump. So how do you weigh those two things, that this really was more about Donald Trump as opposed to an endorsement of your agenda?
So first thing I'm going to say is those exit polls show same-day voters. We had already had almost 2 million people that had already voted. So you got the more GOP-leaning exit polls on that day. That's number one. So I think that the mandate we have is a real mandate, and that mandate started on September 19th when early voting started. And you didn't capture that in your exit polls. We knew it was happening. We could see the energy in everybody. We couldn't even believe it because we were scoring 20 points up. And what did Abigail Spanberger win by? 15? And we got 6. Who in here, raise your hand if you thought we'd get 64 seats? Exactly. Nobody. So we saw it. We saw this coming. We saw a little wave, but we didn't see this doggone tsunami. And so I think this tsunami is going to continue to happen until Republicans join us in this whole governance thing. Like until Republicans decide to stand up to Donald Trump and to MAGA extremism, this will continue to happen. I'm hoping that they get the message because we really do need healthy two-party system. But if they don't, this is the message. They can expect this to happen to them again and again and again. They should have seen it coming. We did. They lost Iowa. They lost special elections in Florida. We overperformed in every single election since he began this destruction. We have overperformed. Find one where we didn't. And so now this is the beginning of what I believe is the tipping point. And Republicans have an opportunity, I think, to join us in governing, to be responsible. I said, it ain't good to be MAGA when MAGA ain't on the ballot. Folks want you to be responsible. And I think the Republicans have an opportunity to do that.
And Julie, I'll just add real quick. If you want to look around Virginia, look at the Lily Franklin race. Wow. Right? This was a Trump district. Look at the Dr. Mark Downey race. Like, these are districts that aren't just about the government shutdown. They aren't just about what's happening in Washington. These are districts that have embraced a positive vision of how we focus on kitchen table issues, from what it costs to go to the grocery store to making sure our kids have an excellent education. And they voted resoundingly for candidates who came from those communities, reflected their values, and not only presented a stark contrast to Donald Trump, but stood for the things that their community is asking for.
And if you think about this, like in Darius Clark, part of rural Suffolk, Isle of Wight, he was a battleground race in 2023. We were worried. We were biting our fingernails. That was a close race. Michael Fagan's close race. Josh Thomas, Josh Coe, close. All of them won by 10 plus points. People are feeling the pain that Donald Trump is causing, and they are coming out to have their voices heard. And they believe that we really want to address affordability. They trust the candidates to really be focused on their issues and not those cultural issues that they like to talk about all the time, the pee and poop caucus. They talk, where are these kids peeing? Where are they pooping? I don't know. That's all they talk about. They do a news story on it every day. And people, grown-ups, are saying, how do I make sure that my kids have the education they deserve? How do I buy school clothes? How do I make sure that they get the education they deserve? How do I make sure I pay my mortgage? And we got people out here talking about crazy stuff every single day. That's all they ran on. They didn't talk about real issues that people were feeling. And I think that's what you see. And you're going to continue to see that until they grow up and move back to the middle. They're going to be continuing to feel these losses.
Tyler, if you look at some of the polling, the exit polling, you mentioned the Lily Franklin race, you mentioned the Bobby Barack race. Democrats seem to do better in rural areas last night, where Democrats typically struggle. Why is that?
I mean, I think, first of all, rural areas are feeling the impact on the economy of what this administration is doing. And we saw early, when we laid out the plan 2 years ago about where we were going to go, we said we are going to challenge Republicans in every potentially winnable district. We had already we were within a hair's breadth of winning that race 2 years ago. And so we were seeing these shifts in rural areas. The speaker put together a rural health care committee that traveled around the state. And so we reject the idea that Democrats can't win in non-traditionally Democratic areas. We think it is about making sure that you are addressing the concerns, you are listening, and I think the rural visits that we did, I think the government shutdown committee that the speaker put together, I think all of those told a story about responsible governance and painted a stark contrast to the destruction of the East Wing. I mean, that's what we're looking at.
And I want to add to that. Before I even was sworn in as speaker, the first thing that I did was went to Southwest Virginia. I went out there with a Republican, with Senator Travis Hackworth, my wife and I. We stayed at his home. I got to go out and see what the needs were. It was bigger than politics. You know, I'm from Texas. I'm an ag major from Texas A&M, an ag school. All right, I'm an ag major. So I'm from the city, but I speak country. I'm bilingual. I speak city and country. And so I was able to go out there and figure out what their needs were. They trusted me that I would deliver. And so we created the Select Committee on Rural Health Care, and we delivered. We delivered resources. We delivered legislation that helped solve problems. We expanded telehealth. We made it easier for people to get access to dental care, to maternal health care. When you do that and address it, people, they're like, I don't know, I like Trump, but those guys, they're at least talking to me. And we talk to people, and we're going to continue to do that. And those Republicans in rural communities, they shouldn't feel safe. They're Trump's shutting down rural hospitals. People are feeling the pinch out there. Farmers, when a soybean farmer calls me, Don Scott from Portsmouth, and says, I got a problem, I need some help with the USDA because I have to put my soybeans in storage. They don't last that long because the USAID, who I used to sell them to, I can't sell them now. There's something going on in this country, and y'all missing it. If you're not paying attention, rural communities are feeling the pain too, and they're going to start holding somebody accountable. They like Trump. They might not get rid of him, but they're going to get rid of all these other jokers, and that's what they did. That's what they began to show us last night.
All right. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much.
Hold on. I want a question from Nick Minot, because he's going to ask a bathroom question. Go ahead. What about these kids using the bathroom?
I actually don't have a question on that. Can you talk about the Northern Virginia seats that you flipped? You have the Western Loudoun Frontier County seat where Delegate Higgins serves right now. Ian Lovejoy's seat in Prince William County. What won the day there in your view?
Yeah, I think very clearly you had candidates, Republican candidates, who were participant or at least cheering on the January 6th insurrection. I think as voters understood what happened and the role that their elected representatives played and saw that in conjunction with what's happening in Washington right this second, these districts filled with the folks who make the federal government work said, we don't want any more of that. And it is their pocketbook, it is their economy, it is their jobs that have been under assault by this White House. And I think they saw folks like John McAuliffe, who had served in the Department of Agriculture. I think they saw folks like Stacey Carroll, who helped make sure that we tick and tie the numbers in the federal government. I think they looked at that, saw that, and said, that's what we want, not the other piece.
Can I just, I'm going to take two more questions. I'm sorry, Johnny. Two more questions.
Given that.
Because I let Nick McNaught, I want to hear the bathroom question, and he let me down.
Do you want one?
And I'm joking.
Given that you won more than you thought you were going to, do you feel compelled to pursue a more ambitious agenda than you were originally going to?
Listen, when we began this journey in 22, I was minority leader. Dan and I, he's an Army guy, I'm a Navy guy. We said we're going to focus and be disciplined. We're going to be focused and we're going to be disciplined. And we remain disciplined. The word of the day now is restraint. We can't overreach. We have to be restrained. We have to be wise with the gift that the voters have given us to govern. We have to be wise in how we move forward. So it's going to be important for us to have a coalition that's restrained, that's smart, that's disciplined, and focus on what voters want us to do. They told us what they want. All we have to do is listen. They're feeling the pain in the pocketbook. We got to stay focused on kitchen table issues, but they also are afraid that our democracy is eroding and being attacked, and they want us to stand up. And that's what we're going to do.
Okay, we've got the last one right here.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now that you have this expanded majority, can you outline your next steps with respect to redistricting?
Redistricting, you said, say that again? No, I'm joking.
You have this expanded
I heard you. Like I said before, I think we have a mandate. That issue has been litigated. I think the governor did press conferences on it and press releases, and people ran ads against it and said we were doing this and doing that. They sued us a couple of times. They 0-2. I think the voters have said they want us to go forward. But at the end of the day, whatever we do, the process, we have to pass another amendment next session. We have to pass it again, and then it will go to the voters if we were able to get it. And then after that, maps and drawn or whatever. So ultimately, the voters of Virginia will have the final say. And as you can see from last night, we happen to trust our voters. We like our voters. And so we think that they'll make the right choice. And if whatever decision they make, we're going to abide by it, just as we did last night. Thank you for that question. Thank y'all for being here. I appreciate it.
A lot that we just heard there, Dr. Caughell, from House Speaker Don Scott there of Virginia, speaking about what he is calling a mandate from the voters here in Virginia, with Democrats getting their largest count in the House of Delegates since the 1980s. He also said that what Abigail Spanberger did is a roadmap for other victories across the state looking forward into 2026 and beyond. What stood out to you, and do you agree with Don Scott there that they laid out a blueprint for the party moving forward?
I think with an asterisk, he's right. They did lay out a blueprint for the party moving forward in states that look like Virginia, and maybe even nationally. So Virginia is always an interesting state to watch in these off-year elections, because most people who live in the state of Virginia were not born here. It's more educated than your average state. It's more heavily tied to government spending. And you could go on and on down the list. I think maybe a third of Virginians now are African American. So it's a diverse state. So in that ways, it does give you some sense of how nationally, in the ways that Virginia mirrors the rest of the country, you might see the rest of the country respond to things. But one of the things that I would say that makes me kind of caveat what he's saying is one of the reasons Spanberger won is that she was a good reflection of what Virginia voters want. Just like Mamdani in New York City is a good reflection of what New York City voters wanted. If you ran Mamdani in Virginia, he wouldn't have won by 15 points, right? I think the Democratic Party takeaway point here is they've got to be a big tent party, they've got to be diverse, and they've got to be running people in places, and you heard Don Scott say this, we ran people everywhere. They've got to be running people in places that we think of as inhospitable to Democrats, and they've got to find Democrats that represent the interests of those constituencies.
And, you know, we're still a year out from the midterms, but we've been talking about them, obviously, because of what's been happening with the redistricting and the attempt to change the maps for the U.S. House of Representatives, which, again, was a push by the president. How do you think he is feeling this morning after he sees what has taken place in these elections across the country? And you hear Don Scott say, when you look at what Virginia did last night, it doesn't look good for 2026.
It doesn't. And let's be clear, right? 2026 is a long time from now in politics terms, right? A lot could happen between then and now. I will say, though, for President Trump, I think he's got to be concerned in 2026 he's going to end up with a Democratic Congress and there's going to be oversight, and that is going to be draining and ugly for his administration. Corruption issues related to kind of law enforcement, good governance, all of that stuff is going to occupy a lot of his time. I would also say, too, for those of us who pay attention to politics, his call on Texas to redistrict, this is exactly what was going to happen. This is always what was going to happen. And in reality, by the time we get to the end of this cycle, Republicans might net 1 or 2 seats relative to the seats that Democrats pull from gerrymandering these maps. And the really, truly sad part of all of this is this entire process is going to make Americans feel even less good about an electoral system that they really focus on the inadequacies of. They're going to make voting feel even less representative of the opinions of voters by gerrymandering these maps. And the last thing I would say, I'm going on kind of a diatribe here, but there is a real cost to gerrymandering. And you see some politicians in places like Illinois and Maryland who are already pretty heavily gerrymandered, kind of digging in their heels a little bit, because you can over gerrymander. There's this thing called a dummy mander where you draw districts thinking they're going to benefit you, but in reality, because you're moving voters around, what you do is you make districts that weren't competitive more competitive, and you put yourself at risk. This was not something that President Trump, I think, carefully considered. I think this was like an instinctual kind of Trumpian, let's do this, it'll make me safer. I don't know that that's going to be the case, but again, much like a lot of the president's rhetoric, what it will do is undermine confidence in the American electoral system.
And Dr. Caughell, I know we have you just for a few more minutes here, and I just want to give you the floor. If there's anything that we haven't talked to during your time, there's so much we can hit on that we have not been able to even within this hour. But as you are having to head out, what's one thing, one big takeaway from what we saw last night that you absolutely want to make sure is mentioned?
Yeah. So when I was listening to Winsome Earle-Sears' speech, both last night and when you just played it, it's striking to me that one of the first things she says is, I'm not supposed to be here. And that is such an insane thing to say in the United States of America, where we have a system and a country that's built on the idea that if you're an immigrant and you come here and you do well and you work hard, you can rise up. And I think you saw that Winsome Sears last night was not a great reflection of Virginian values. And I think that comment kind of encapsulates part of it, because you can see the kind of Trumpian rhetoric kind of pulling through a little bit. And there's a way in which that speech was just so discordant from what Americans see. People should be able to protest and then go home and cook their kids dinner. They shouldn't be, watching ICE agents, shoot priests with rubber bullets who are praying during protest, right? So I think there's a very real way in which the campaign that Winsome Earle-Sears ran for a lot of Virginians just seemed really disconnected from the events that they were looking at on the ground.
Interesting comments there. And again, Dr. Leslie Caughell with Virginia Wesleyan University, political professor there. Thank you so much for coming in this morning and talking with us through this very historic election night, which I'm sure we're going to be digesting and dissecting for quite some time as we move forward now to the future of Virginia, but also the 2026 midterms being the next big thing on our plates.